Today, we're joined by Brian and Corey from Vital Consulting. They are here to talk about selecting an impact tool. This is the third in a series of three where we talk about impact measurement. First, we talked about getting started with impact measurement. Then we talked about sort of the landscape of impact tools available, and the greatest and latest in the series is how to finally select that impact tool to help you do those impact measurements that we talked about in the beginning. Brian and Corey are co-founders of Vital Consulting, which have helped many companies that you might be aware of, you might have heard, get started and strategize their social impact strategies. And they're here today to help you with some very tough decisions and hopefully make those tough decisions a little bit easier with the webinar today. So I'll turn it over to you all.
Really, really appreciate that. Thank you, Brianna, Alicia, and the rest of the Pledge One team. And for all y'all out in the Pledge One community, stay at it. We know these times are wild and woolly, so keep your energy high, stay healthy, and keep fighting that great fight. So in our last webinar, we spoke again to the landscape, this great proliferation of providers. This webinar is a continuation from that discussion where you're asking the right questions and engaging stakeholders in the most optimal manner to both bring the right measurement regime and right platform into your organization, but also make your programs ultimately successful. In this session, we're going to do three things. So in the next 20 or so minutes, we're going to equip you with a building your case set of tips there for your executive team, as you are in fact building that case to make these selections and programs successful. Then helping you again categorize as a little quick redux on the landscape, and then pursue an efficient and successful selection process. Now, we labored to make platform selection sexy and sizzly, but we knew that one way of doing that would be to put AI on the slide and maybe even just a little bit of food that sizzles when you cook it. So if nothing else, the imagery here will sizzle the selection. We'll do our best to make it sizzle as well. I believe I'll pass it over to my esteemed colleague, Corey.
So just to recap a little bit, what we covered in our last session had more to do with asking the right questions in preparation for a system selection. And so the importance of this is not only to get a better sense of the different kind of dynamics within your organization, but it's also to help feed a business case inside your organization. And it's really critical for you to have a business case because it helps you to get executive approval. It helps you get budget and buy-in across the organization. Now, some of these questions may look slightly different when they're applied to a business case, and they have a few more dimensions applied as well. But we're going to do our best to help you roll out what some of these critical elements are going to be so that you can speak the language of the business and as you are preparing for this process. Now, one of the big pieces of this is going to be clearly articulating the challenges of not having the tools that you need. And this is a big deal, especially in these types of roles, because not everybody in the business is going to understand what your business needs are and how they contribute to the organization. So it's really hard. It's really important for you to articulate clearly the amount of time that things take, the amount of effort that it takes, and the impact that it's going to have on the organization, because you're typically operating in relatively small teams. So every incremental tool that you can acquire can help make your job day to day much easier. And part of that is going to be helping them understand how this benefits the business directly, right? And making sure that these tools help them to understand what's going to contribute to better employee engagement, communications across the organization, outside the organization, what benefits are going to accrue to the brand, and lots of other dimensions of activity as well. And how the different features, the software and the functionality that you're looking for are going to help position your team for success when it comes to these things. But most importantly, I think one of the things that a lot of us have struggled to articulate in the past is what's the real return on the investment? And part of this has to do with, what the metrics are that are defined for your particular function, but also how these tie back to the core business strategy. So it's really important that you roll all of these things up into a succinct document that can help articulate this. And as you progress, make sure that you're keeping your eyes open for signals of engagement or lack of engagement, right? A rubber stamp can be a sign of success, but it can also be a signal that folks are not necessarily engaged or in tune with what the value of this investment and the importance of this investment is going to be for your team. So those are some things that we should all keep our eyes open for.
The industry is producing excellent platforms to elevate your programs, no matter what category of this domain of strategy and operating excellence present themselves. These providers are offering massive, comprehensive sets of capabilities. Some providers remain very wide in encapsulating and providing to you and your employees and customers lots of these capabilities. Some are point solutions, and they're very surgical, and they go very, very deep. So most, but not all, do also then, as a vendor community, have sophisticated sales and customer success teams and other ways that will aid your journey in learning about what they offer and encapsulating that in your selection process later. So be certain to work with these vendors from the founder down in some cases to arrive at the right category, which is where we arrive here visually now, and the right capability and the great set of capabilities that you need. So it's not only important to understand this market and this landscape a little bit, but also which products and capabilities exist. Plenty of overlap, plenty of ways of providing price point to you, and certainly different reputations and customer experiences as you navigate this. So this is the way that our strategy agency helps organizations either in the early Series A, B, C stages or later, perhaps renovating their program or elevating their carbon accounting, for example, would categorize these capability sets for vendors. And so we like to think about these typically along the line of employee volunteering and giving, corporate giving for your institutional decision-making. What investments, philanthropically or otherwise, will your brand make in your impact strategy? ESG, DEI, and impact to us, I know, is a broad bucket. There are certainly an ability to carve out here or there, and sustainability, which is a very, very broad spectrum of technology as well. But certainly important, as we shared last time, to categorize this massive industry that, again, has hundreds and hundreds of providers.
So now we're going to get down to the meat of it. And we actually think that it's helpful to think about the process of how you acquire this software as an opportunity. And hopefully you'll have already engaged a lot of your internal stakeholders, but any of these steps will help you to define what you need, right? It's really important to think about what you need versus what you want, unpacking your real requirements and then prioritizing and refining them so that you're determining which ones are truly just are the things that you need to get the job done and which will be nice to have. And then make sure that you do your research to know what's in the market and not just with what is within reach, because it's sometimes convenient if you have relationships with folks or if you've heard how different software works to just go with what folks are recommending. But it's also critical, we believe, for you to understand the market and where there are benefits and opportunities, as well as some drawbacks and obstacles. And obviously there are budgetary restrictions when it comes to these things, and then making your final selection at the end of that. So defining your needs is probably one of the most important steps of the journey, right? Obviously we've talked about stakeholder engagement, but understanding how your interests overlap with those different parts of the business is going to be a really critical thing for you to be doing. Defining the functionality and the business objectives. We talked about the business case. So all of these exercises, all these steps are going to be iterative, but understanding how this all ties together for your program and how it integrates effectively with the business. And then getting a better understanding of the full budget that you might have at your disposal, but also what the full cost of an implementation is going to be. And so that's not just going to be software. That's also going to be any implementation services, ongoing maintenance and expenses, any types of security reviews or integrations that you have with other parts of the organization. These are all things that encompass like the entirety of the budget that you're going to need, both in terms of money, but also in terms of resources that you're going to need from other parts of your organization to help make this successful.
One pro tip to consider is a short survey of your entire workforce, the future users of the platform that you seek to select and implement. And so those are your customers. It really is nice to understand the sentiment and the concerns of those customers. What is their appetite? What value are you going to offer to them? What must-haves and concerns do they have? So a survey of your user base can really help you guide not just selection, but the way that you make your program successful. And pro tips in this presentation will be illustrated with a little light bulb. And then we're going to now touch on some gotchas along the lines of this presentation as well. One gotcha to consider certainly is that vendors can be great advocates and an extension of your team. And in some cases, again, you're going to be working at the founder level of these technology providers. But be certain to avoid getting too swept up in that relationship with that organization, that pre-sales organization or that executive team of the vendors, because it may then lead you to just grab what's within reach among your immediate and tight network. And you're going to understand the urgency of this field of vendors. It is definitely a fight right now to sort of earn your business. And I think that's something you can play to your advantage. So certainly work your way into the vendor community and not, again, just grab what's close and there on the shelf. Don't sacrifice the capabilities that you need just because you have a pre-existing great relationship in one of the vendors. And so now that you've had a chance to assemble your needs, which I think Corey was really exquisite in articulating, there's a real benefit in getting that outlined and not just running into the capability field. It's time to translate those into requirements that you really then can start to prioritize. So you started listing out your needs. Now it's time to consider what you're going to need to get approval and to be successful. For example, what internal system, will a new platform, in what environment will it enter? Will it enter an area that's completely nascent and has brand new functionality for your employees that doesn't exist today in your HR technology offerings or in any other parts of your stack? So keeping in mind that has both a integration implication, but also a user and user ease of use implication. Also, are there going to be security or other compliance issues to consider? What impact will this have on determining your needs? If your IT team is pushing back on a certain access to technology by way of mobile phones and so on, that may be instrumental if that's what you're hearing as a need. So you may have to kind of go in and address some of the needs that your security team has, for example. Next, you may know your budget, but then where does that budget fully come from? And will you be able to fund it fully? I can remember many times, and I know Corey probably feels the same, we in the impact group, wherever we were placed, had some of the budget, but often needed to carry our hat around the organization to get more support, to go bigger and to tie an even larger offering into this need of this capability area. And lastly, it's now time to build a matrix of your requirements. Corey, any tips from here?
Yeah, and I think a really important thing to think about, especially as you're doing the evaluation of things, is, as I alluded to before, this idea of needs versus wants, right? What do you really need to get your job done, and what is functionality that might be optional? And then also think about some of those critical items like the user experience. What is your company accustomed to providing in terms of employee experience and communications capabilities, integrations? And what some of the potential trade-offs are in terms of functionality versus the budget impact versus the time to being able to implement some of these things. And think about how flexible the tools can be, right? A lot of these tools have the ability to interface with different systems of record, but they can be pretty weighty. A lot of vendors actually make claims around APIs and the ability to report and a lot of other types of functionality. But if you dig beneath the surface just a little bit, you start to realize that those things are actually not as usable or as readily available as you might think. And so it's important for you to really think about what you need versus what you want, and then translate that into how you do your research for the selection process. So given how many vendors that we all have reaching out every day on this, and I know everybody's under a lot of stress and pressure, and your inbox is filling up, but research is likely one of the last things on our mind. You just want to get what you need. So it's important to think about what that entire landscape looks like in terms of features, capabilities, and cost, right? Our overview at the top that we shared earlier is just one version of this, but there's lots of others that are available out there as well. Importantly, it can be really easy to default to a position of this is good enough if something seems like it meets your immediate need. But thinking back to our questions and your requirements, your needs and your nice to haves, how can you actually maximize what you get from a product perspective for the budget that you have and have something that can potentially grow with your company into the future? I think it's really important to think about all these different moving parts and not narrow the field too quickly before you have an opportunity to really evaluate what's in the market today and what might be available or helpful for you as a company.
And one gotcha to point out here and really shine a light on is the pricing terms and structures. for different CSR, ESG, and impact platforms. Their way of pricing can vary greatly. Some platforms price per user, some price per usage, along many other lines as well. So giving platforms, just for one example, in case you're out there searching for a mechanism for your employees to make donations more nimbly and perhaps match those donations or attach donations to other actions taken like Dollars for Doers programs and so on. Those platforms can charge, for example, a user fee, but also then charge a certain percentage on donation. So your finance team could carry, if they're carrying a matching donation, or carry that maintenance fee, a larger total cost of ownership here. So your employee makes a donation for $100, you're passing along a fee to your employee, and they pay $103 to make a $100 donation, which again is a creative way to move forward with a lower admin budget to sort of pass that on through to the employee. But at minimum, if you're not passing that through, that transaction fee of several percentage points may add to your total cost of ownership. So just one example of things to be thinking about. And there are other complexities that start to fall into that, be that international or otherwise. So get informed, ask for a model that you can in fact meet your needs with, and or perhaps find some ways to be creative, but most importantly, understand the total cost of ownership so that things don't go badly.
And we're not saying that you need to understand all the features and all the different dimensions of pricing, like all the way down to its super granular levels. But it is helpful to think about how the features compare across products, how the different pricing models work, who pays for what. Sometimes the vendor expects you as the company to underwrite the transaction fees. Sometimes they want to offload that to whomever the donor is. So we just want you to know that there are resources available to help inform this research. There are some great resources available from places like Realized Worth that have done full product and industry scans down to granular levels of features and functionality. They've done all the hard work around features and compatibility and cost and all that stuff. It's up to you to put this to work and make sure that you're approaching this process eyes wide open so that you know what you're getting into, you know what you're going to get out the other side of this, and you know how you're going to be able to put it to work for you.
Absolutely. So let's step into step 4 here in the selection process. This is narrowing your options. Now you've done your research, you've begun to narrow things down. Now it's time to assemble a short list of vendors that appear to meet the mark and can engage more deeply, or you can engage more deeply for demos, for an opportunity to ask the key questions along your matrix to understand who's going to really fit that bill, and to then ask for follow-up materials, including that version 1.0 pricing proposal that should match with your expectations. Remember, you are in the driver's seat of this process, and those vendors can provide you the information they need. We just want to make this efficient. Corey, any thoughts?
And applying a little bit of discipline to that, I think, can be really helpful, right? So building a matrix or a scoring sheet or something like that, so that you can solicit the help of others to evaluate, but still have a really consistent process. You have consistent questions, you're getting the information that you need, you have the ability to track everything that's going on, so that you're getting everything that you need from every conversation, regardless of whether you're the one taking the lead on it or you're able to delegate out to a suite of different stakeholders that might be helpful for you in the process. Either way, you just want to make sure that this is as efficient as you can make it. And so leading into the last one, the final step is obviously making a decision with all this information. So this is an opportunity for you to re-engage or engage some of your stakeholders again, right? So that you can confirm their support. You can collect some great feedback on what the process is and what the findings are that you've made, or even literally to solicit their support, right? Schedule some integrations, confirming budget, like really getting back to the basics of what you're going to need to make this successful. And whether you make them vote or just share their opinion, it doesn't have to necessarily be so hard and fast like that, but you want to make sure that they're bought into that decision to make sure that they have a little bit of ownership and investment in the process. And I'm not saying everybody's going to want to be involved or invested in every single selection that's taking place, but given that you have a broad range of stakeholders across your organization, you likely want to try to find ways to get them invested at the opportunities that you do have. Finally, you want to make sure that you use this opportunity through the course of selection to map out even a high-level implementation, right? This encourages them to give some thought to exactly what it's going to take, a little bit more detail perhaps in some of the early conversations, but also get down to brass tacks about budget, what it's going to take from a resourcing perspective, and then also timing, right? Thinking about things like integrations and security reviews or data privacy requirements things like that. Those are all complex and they have a lot of different pressures coming from different areas of the organization. You're not the only one, obviously, trying to buy some software to help you do your job, but you want to make sure that you can get the timing right. So you can set expectations both from a vendor perspective, but also understand how long it's going to take for you to navigate the procurement process or the final stretch of the procurement process, and then to do implementation.
Absolutely. A gotcha here is don't surprise the leadership after you've done all this work with hidden costs and unforeseen additional costs. So again, as Corey had said, additional coding that may be needed to make this work in your environment, additional security review, et cetera, et cetera. Do you need an implementer to help if you're really trying to do something robust out of the gate? Be thorough, know your total cost of ownership, and encapsulate and package the reasons that you're making this selection into a really succinct package and reflect feedback and your scoring mechanism so that executive teams know that your decision is bulletproof, even if you're not pursuing a formal RFP process.
Thank you all so much for your time today. We know you're all busy. We know this is a little bit deep and detailed, but it's very important for you to get these types of things right, especially in the early days when you're just starting to acquire the tools that you need.
That's right. We hope that you found this content helpful, and may good selection be with you.
Thanks, Brian and Corey. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function or to look for the page on the community that will have this loaded onto it, or you could email myself or Alicia at brianna@pledge1%.org. There is one question that we got a little bit earlier, if you are willing to take just this one question for right now.
Sure.
Absolutely.
How can I balance desires of internal stakeholders with budget, team constraints, etc.?
I feel like with most of these platforms, the ability to start with a subset of features or start really simple with something and then move into things that can be more sophisticated. So again, for example, start by passing along a bit of the admin fee in the giving platform to the donor. That people are used to sort of making tips and so on when they check out of places, and maybe that's a way to get things going. And then over time, take that back on as your budget expands and you're adding matching and doing things like that. So I think there's an iterative process with some of these platforms. And I think that even applies to carbon accounting and other things. There's ways of moving into part of the work and then layering up and doing integrations and so on in the latter phase. Corey?
I mean, I think that really just reinforces the need to understand what the different moving parts are of your transaction, right? Whether it's the pricing side, understanding whether there's additional features and functionality that might be able to be added over time at additional costs so that you can clearly articulate what some of those trade-offs are, but also being very clear with folks about what it is that you need as the business owner from this acquisition and from this procurement, so that you get what you need to get the job done at a very absolute minimum. And then the rest can be somewhat optional, right? And you have a little bit of move to maneuver with folks so they understand, yeah, maybe we don't need to do those integrations today and we can reduce the upfront cost. But ideally, we want to do X, Y, and Z to make sure that we get access to the HR system so that we can coordinate and align the paid time off if that's something that we have, or we can directly integrate with the payroll function so that we understand how folks can be giving on a recurring basis. So there's lots of different moving pieces, but the more you know, the more maneuverability I think you have. So that it gives you a little bit of opportunity there.
And I would say clearly too, if you can get budget for what you're working on with this, but then enlist people, be it your storytellers and marketing, your HR team and employee experience, the facilities team, with the way you're using spaces and so on, suddenly you realize you've got other folks that may want to contribute to the ways with which you get things budgeted over time as you build a great case around that seed that then grows into something really exciting, providing a lot of value against your overall corporate strategy.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you to all.